Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are here in Rocky Top, Tennessee, you know, like the song. And we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Now, I've been keeping a lot of our adventures pretty upbeat and exciting, and this one is exciting, but for a historic reason. I like to come to different kinds of places and share the stories of those places with you guys at home. That way, if you can't come out here, you know a little bit more about the world around us. And if you can, you find a little hidden gem that has a great story. Today is one of those. So let's roll the intro and I'll tell you more about what I'm talking about. Okay, so today, guys, we are visiting the Coal Creek Miners Museum. It is right here on Main Street in Rocky Top, Tennessee. If you are planning a visit of your own, take note of this because it will come in handy. Okay guys, so as you come in, it's a smaller museum, but it is free and it's really cool because they kind of have a progression here. So we're going to go down this wall right here and kind of wrap around. There is actually a mock-up mine in the back, a topographical map, and then we're going to kind of talk about a little bit more of why this area is so important and why I brought you here today. But first, let's learn about mining. Okay guys, let's just first learn a little bit about what the process would have been like. We have some blasting caps here, and it says below each one of these exactly what their job would have been. And attached to that would have been a blasting cable. Now this is a pretty long fuse right here. Sometimes they didn't use long fuses though. Sometimes they were much shorter. We learned that whenever we went to the salt mines. Then we have some other things here like the auger. Now, I learned about these at a different location. Basically what they would do is they would create a hole using this long auger shaft, and then they would put in the dynamite and top it off with the blasting cap and the fuse. That's what would create the hole that they could start working in, or would settle down the sediments or break apart the rocks that were too big. They used it for different things, but basically this was the first step in mining right here. And from there, they would move on to the super hard labor, using the picks to break apart and harvest everything that they were going to get. In this case, it was coal. Here are a few ways that they might have been able to see through some of that darkness. These didn't come along though until much later in the mining game. Now up here we have a little history of specifically this area. This is Henry Howard Wiley, and he actually brought the mines into this area. If you read here, it tells a little bit more about the Coal Creek Coal Company. And I just learned that he actually had to go in and bring people from other places because they had no expertise in this whatsoever. And when he did, it started the boom. So what do I mean by it started the boom? We're not talking about the dynamite boom. What happened was once they started to actually train people to go into the mines and they kind of knew what they were doing, they started finding more and more and more. And because of that, it became more profitable. When it became more profitable, more and more people needed to be in the area to do the mining and to ship out the things and to keep the progress train a-rolling. So as you can see through these right here, it tells a little bit more about that process. Okay, does this song right here sound familiar? This was a coal mining song. 16 tons, and what do you get? I can't put the original song because of copyright, but in your head, be singing that as we kind of look at this. This right here is a diagram of what one of the mines would have looked like. And as we move on, we can see that the job was hard, super hard. The company owners actually put together these kind of homes for the miners to live in. And despite the fact that they were there specifically for that job, they still had to pay rent. This is really cool because you can actually see the commissary, what it would have looked like, and also what a typical payment would have looked like. Look at this, house rent $9 right here. House lights $5.10, $1 for the bathhouse. Social Security was taken out then too, guys. hospital, and then a cash advance right there. Wow, these are little treasures. Now this is something else we're going to go check out in just a few minutes. You see here in the background it says Militia Hill. There was actually a rebellion that happened on this hill that we're going to learn a little bit more about, but these are some of the artifacts that were recovered from up there. Now the ones that were brought in to teach the locals how to mine were the Welsh, and they have a nice history in this community now as a result of this. However, they weren't the only ones to mine the area. They also had convict labor at one point. And right here it tells us a little bit more about the convicts that came to actually work the mines. You know, labor was super cheap, but it was cheaper if you could get a convict to do it. And through the historic photos, you can see kind of what that would have looked like as they brought everybody in. Wow, that is a lot of people just being brought in by train. Now we talked about Militia Hill. Well, like I said, we're gonna go up there in a minute, but this is kind of the backstory. Basically, it all started because there was talk of being shortchanged on the weight of the coal. They were paid by the ton. And can you imagine working all day long and then being told, just kidding, you don't actually have as much as you think you do? Well, obviously that did not sit well. So that took through a series of really interesting things happening. They started to strike back. There was a rebellion and things did not go well. And it resulted in something that one could only say was catastrophically kind of crazy. But again, we're going to go up there and learn a little bit more about this in a minute. These historic photos are just really awesome. Right here, this is one of the coal companies. This is the Cambria Coal Company, and this was taken in 1941. Such a treat to be able to see these things, because a lot of photos from back in the day are no longer around because of the way that they preserved them. So everything that we see in this museum, which was an original photo, is a delight. Just a piece of history that's waiting to be found. Okay guys, now we're going to go into the mine. They have a nice mock-up here so we can kind of get an idea conceptually of what it might have been like. Now again, this is a conceptual idea for us. It's going to give us kind of an idea as to what the walls might have looked like a little bit, and kind of the space and what the garb that they would have worn would have looked like as well. Notice his hat. His hat actually is one that would have the oil and the lamp. They're wearing bib overalls, which would have been very common at the time because of their durability and availability of the denim. You also see that he doesn't have any kind of fancy stuff. A little timepiece to kind of have outside contact so he would know what time the shift it was. And then down here, some sturdy work boots, because you needed something that had a good grip in these mines. Next to him might have been some of the tools. And then a child. Yep, at the time there were no child labor laws. So they would bring their kiddos with them because they could continue working as the dad or the uncle would be in here banging away, separating things. Kids were quick, speedy, and could get around. Now, something that I learned when I came here was that as a result of the disasters that happened here at this particular mining area, they actually started to put in child labor laws, saying you couldn't go into the mines unless you were 16 or up. And I think that that's something that can be taken away from a disaster. We shouldn't have to get to a disaster in life before we make some changes, but sometimes that's kind of what happens. So with that said, let's talk about the disaster that was the Coal Creek Mining Company. Okay, right here, this is where it begins. It was considered to be the South's worst mining disaster. The morning of Monday, May 19th, 1902, 200 men and boys, see, 200 men and boys entered the mine to begin their regular shift. Within minutes, the massive explosion rocked the entire mountainside, and no one emerged alive. Now imagine this: men and their children, all devastated by this. And then the rest of the people who either weren't working that day or who were the wives or other children were left to figure out life after that. It couldn't have been easy. Life then was hard enough, but then you add all this disaster on top of that. It took them quite a while to figure out how to even recover the bodies. And in that, there were a lot of lessons to be learned. This right here is a photo of them waiting for their bodies to be uncovered and revealed, holding vigil, hoping that someone might emerge. It says here that they had to actually go into a different entrance for a thistle mine just to get inside. This talks a little bit more about the first that were found. Originally, they said that the death toll was 184, but it didn't include everyone. They were later buried together near the mine. And this is just how horrible it really was. Those are all coffins right there. Isn't that terrible? This is potentially one of the saddest things I've seen so far. It says here that a number of the miners were not killed in the explosion, but they were trapped underground when the main tunnel collapsed. They decided that they were going to write their final letters to their family members because they knew they were going to run out of air. And this is actually one of those. I'm going to let you see that, and you can pause the screen. It's absolutely heartbreaking. Well, some had paper to write on. One actually had only this piece of slate, and he placed his final message on this sad piece of slate. Now behind me is a family that was affected by the disaster. It says below them that eventually the mining company did settle with each of the families for $300 for each person from their family who was certified as deceased. $300 was the price of life. $300. Now mind you, $300 was a lot more then than it is now, but still, how do you put a price on someone's life? How? The area was not finished with disaster, however. 1902 was just the predecessor of another horrible disaster that happened in 1911. And again, you can find the names of all of those who perished right here in the museum. It's kind of sad because you would think that after a single disaster that, they'd be spared a little bit, but just a few short years later, again, they were in that time of crisis. It has to be extremely nerve-wracking to know after that your spouse or your family member is going back into the mines again. But that was the way of life. That was how they made money. So it was one of those things that just kind of continued to perpetuate, and still to this day does, because coal mining is still very much so an industry. It has to be very unsettling though. Okay, right here we have a topographical map of the community and also a driving trail that you can actually take and see a little bit more about the different area. There are several different points of interest as you go along. As you'll notice, they're all marked by these little numbers, and they have a corresponding paper over here to the side to tell us what they are. Here they are right here. So you have a couple of different cemeteries, the unmarked convict graves, and also Beech Grove, which was a special Welsh cemetery. They have Fragerville and New Circle Cemetery, and then a monument. And while you're here, you can pick up one of these to actually take with you so that you can do the full discovery tour of the Coal Creek Miners area. On the back of that map, it has information about each one of the stops, so you'll have kind of a better idea as to what exactly you're looking at. In this last section of the museum, it has a little bit more about the safety and the precautions that have kind of been updated throughout the years. There's a few really interesting pieces here that I want to show you, so I'm just going to show you a few of these kind of in passing and highlight a couple of the ones that I think are the most fascinating. Now this right here I thought was just really, really interesting. The fact that they would use an actual bird in a coal mine. I also thought this was pretty interesting because this is like a self-contained little first aid kit. So you could easily put this in your pocket and have first aid right there, disposable to you. Remember how a while ago we talked about the mining disaster of 1911? Well, because they had started to implement some of these safety procedures, 5 men made it out. 5, which is by far more than the previous disaster. Still not a win with 84 people passing, but 5 did make it out. And I think that the thing that can be taken away from that is that the more safety measures that they put into place, like these that we see on this table, the further and further we get toward the ultimate goal of having no disasters or no death. And I think that's really important. Just a short drive away from the main museum, we bring ourselves to this cemetery, and this is actually called the Miners' Circle. This monument right here signifies many of the people who were lost in the 1911 disaster. And I think that it's necessary for us to come up here because we have to tell the whole story. Those were real people, real family members, and this is many of their final resting place right here. Now, something that you'll notice while you're kind of browsing around, many of these stones actually circle around this main monument. And I think that this is supposed to be symbolic of the fact that they were actually like kneeling in a circle in prayer. I think I've seen that on some of the different information. So I think that that's kind of a wonderful way to honor them, is to put them together, arm in arm, brethren, throughout everything, because they were known to be brethren in the mines. This is one of the only places that you'll find every single person around the circle has the exact same date of death. Now this location is listed on the Tennessee Historic Places Registry, so I definitely encourage you guys to come out and check it out. Take a moment, read some of the inscriptions. It's absolutely devastating to think that all of these people would have been together and just perished at the same time. Really kind of makes you think. We go on a lot of adventures, we do a lot of cool stuff, and I like to talk about history and stuff like that. But the moments that we come to places like this, it kind of makes you realize that we woke up today. We have a chance to go on an adventure. These people woke up, did their typical thing to go to work, and didn't make it home. So we need to be a little bit more appreciative of the little moments that we have that are like this, where we can go and learn and be historic and see stuff, because, you know, somebody didn't get up this morning. Okay guys, as we're going along this road on the way to the circle, I found 3 different signs, and these are all from the Coal Creek watershed area and tells us a little bit more about what we learned in the museum. So if you want to pause on these, you can. This is just the first right here. I'm going to pull down to the second and the third as well. Now the nice thing about these is you can actually just pull off the road and read them, and you don't have to really go and walk anywhere. So you can get a little bit of the story from the comfort of your car. So even during bad weather, this is something that you can definitely pull off and see. Okay, here is the next one. And this one talks a little bit about the Freighterville mine workers who were working and about the time of the 1902 explosion. This one also talks about the 1902 explosion. It says here 216 miners total were actually killed. And this is also the one that tells us a little bit more about the messages that were found that were displayed there in the museum. Now if you look at the second paragraph there, it actually is absolutely even more tragic, because look at this. An entire family perished, including 5 brothers and 3 sons. And 3 more sons, and 3 more sons. Only 3 adult males were actually left alive in the town. Wow. When you put it in this perspective kind of like that, it makes it even more horrific to think about. How would you have reacted if everyone around you was just gone? It would be probably one of the most difficult to process things, and myself, I can't fathom staying after that happened. I just can't. But a lot of people did, because they didn't have anywhere else to go. Okay, remember in the museum when we talked about Militia Hill? Well, this is where it happened, right here. It says right here, Fort Anderson was actually constructed up on the top of this hill, and it was built here on Militia Hill in 1892. Now, why did this happen? Well, they needed to be able to make sure that they could restore order to the area, because things were going awry. And in retaliation, troops ended up firing into the town of Coal Creek, which is now known as Lake City. It can be actually seen through the Y Gap at the Walden Ridge, which is to our east. It ended up being a place where soldiers stayed until about 1893, so a little bit over a year, but this ended up being a place where a very epic, historic part of what is now the Rocky Top community kind of took place. Now we can go right through this area over here, and there is actually another sign right over there for us to check out. Now right here it actually says that soldiers of the Tennessee National Guard became easy targets for the miners, which were actually positioned on higher ground because the trees were cut away to form Fort Anderson. So it might have looked something like this cleared area through here, where there's only a few saplings blocking, and if the miners would have been like over there where the road is, they would have easily been able to see through. And then it only gets weirder from there. They actually had national news coverage right here in Tennessee of what was going on. It was like a standoff between the fort and the miners. And there was a moment where accidental discharge meant no more posing for photos as a result of causing some chaos just to take a picture. We can go even deeper back, guys. This clearing here has something really interesting at the end for us to check out. Do you see what I see? Is that a cannon? I bet when we started this adventure looking at a mining museum, you never thought that it would go there, but it definitely has. And wow, so this is where the military actually was positioned, that they fired into the community. And they have a pretty straight shot. I can see buildings from here. Let me show you. So here is the direct sight path of the cannon. See that clearing through the trees right there? Do you see it? That is the community right there at the bottom of that. Now it says here that this particular cannon was actually used to fire back into a miner's nest. Basically what happened was just south of Y Gap there was a group of miners that had dug in and they were defending their territory. Welsh miners who had left the area after convicts had arrived in 1877 kept close ties with the local miners, and Coal Creek miners helped stop the attempts to bring in more convicts to mine the southeast Kentucky mines all the way up until 1886. The Kentucky miners reciprocated and helped in the fight, coming down from Kentucky into Tennessee to take back what was theirs. So yeah, guys, this entire thing happened because they tried to replace the workers with basically free labor. And they didn't like it because it was taking jobs away from people who otherwise weren't even being paid hardly a living wage. I can't imagine you have your whole family here, you've been through so much already, and then they try to replace you with people that they aren't even paying to do the job. That's insane. So yeah, they dug in and they fought together, and eventually it worked. So due to their effort, by 1893, there was legislative funds that were put aside to actually build the Brushy Mountain State Prison. And that ended all convict labor and gave the miners back their jobs. Now, does that mean that mining was perfect? No, not by any means. But they had secured their jobs, and thus they were giving themselves a chance to survive in these crazy mountains that we have going on here. So all in all, we learned a lot today. We learned that miners teamed up and worked together to make sure that they could work. We also learned that devastation happened not once but twice in this area. This is a piece of Tennessee history, and I'm glad that we came out today. I know it's a little bit of a different adventure. It's historic, it's interesting, and it fascinates me. So I wanted to share it with you guys. If you're able to come to Tennessee, I definitely encourage you to come out. There are dozens of these signs that go along and tell a little bit more of the story. But if you're not, I hope that this was helpful for you at home to see a little piece of the past. If you've enjoyed today's video, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and check out future content. I publish new videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye!